7 years ago, my husband vanished and left me to face the ruins of our life alone. Last night, he finally returned, but as we fled from a team of professional killers, a single text message changed everything. The man standing next to you isn't Elias. They say grief is a heavy cloak, something you drape over your shoulders and learn to carry until your muscles stop aching from the weight. But for me, grief wasn't a garment. It was a wrecking ball. It didn't just sit on me. It swung through the walls of the life I had spent 32 years building and reduced it all to a pile of jagged glass and splintered wood. 7 years ago, I had everything. I know how that sounds, like the beginning of a cliché cautionary tale, but it was the objective truth. I was Sarah Sterling, the principal partner of Sterling & Thorne, one of the most respected boutique architectural firms in Seattle. My husband, Elias, was the thorn in that equation. He was the visionary, the man who could look at a vacant, rusted-out lot and see a glass and steel masterpiece. I was the one who made those visions structurally sound. I handled the contracts, the city permits, and the mountain of logistics that kept our dreams from falling over. We were the it couple of the Pacific Northwest design scene. We had a penthouse overlooking the Sound, a weekend cottage in the San Juans, and a circle of friends that felt more like a chosen family. We were planning for a child. We had just broken ground on the Horizon project, a $30 million waterfront development that was supposed to be our legacy. Then came the morning of October 14th. It was a Tuesday. It started with the smell of burnt espresso and the sound of the rain tapping a rhythmic coat against our floor-to-ceiling windows. Elias kissed the top of my head, complained about a slight headache, and said he was going to walk to the corner bodega to get some aspirin and the morning paper. He didn't take his car. He didn't take his phone. It was sitting right there on the charger, blinking with incoming emails about the Horizon Foundation pours. He took his wallet and his keys. He never came back. At first, I thought he'd been mugged. Then I thought maybe he'd collapsed. I spent 48 hours in a frantic blur of hospital waiting rooms and police precincts. But as the days turned into weeks, the narrative shifted from a tragedy to something far more sinister. The police didn't find a body, but they did find a paper trail. While I had been focusing on the structural integrity of our buildings, Elias had been eroding the structural integrity of our lives. Under the guise of miscellaneous project costs, he had been siphoning millions from the Horizon Project escrow accounts into offshore holdings I didn't know existed. He hadn't just disappeared, he had escaped. He had waited until the exact moment the project reached its point of no return, when the investors' money was fully committed and the liabilities were at their peak. And then he checked out, leaving me standing in the center of a financial crater. The collapse was breathtakingly fast, because my name was on every contract, every joint account, and every loan guarantee. The law didn't care that I was a grieving wife. To the feds, I was a co-conspirator. To the investors, I was the face of the woman who had stolen their retirements. I lost the firm within 3 months. The penthouse was seized by the bank. My friends vanished faster than the morning mist. I spent 2 years in a legal knife fight just to stay out of prison, eventually settling for a plea that left me with a permanent mark on my record and a debt load that meant I would be working for the rest of my life just to stay at zero. I moved to a different city, a place where the rain felt different, colder, less poetic. I took a job as a freelance draftsman under a pseudonym, working out of a cramped studio apartment above a noisy laundromat in a part of town where no one cared about architecture. I traded silk for polyester and champagne for lukewarm tap water. I rebuilt myself into a ghost. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was dead in a ditch or sipping a mojito on a beach in a country without an extradition treaty. I eventually settled on the idea that he was dead. It was easier to process a tragedy than an ultimate betrayal. By year 5, I stopped looking for him in crowds. By year 6, I stopped dreaming about his voice. By year 7, which brings us to last Tuesday, I had finally achieved a sort of numb peace. I had a routine. I had a cat that tolerated me. I had a small savings account that was finally in the black. Then the doorbell rang. It was 9 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. In this neighborhood, a late-night knock usually meant someone was looking for the previous tenant or trying to sell something they'd stolen from a parked car. I checked the peephole, my heart doing a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. The man standing in the hallway was thin, dangerously so. He was wearing a salt and pepper beard that looked unkempt and a heavy wool coat that had seen better decades. He was hunched over, his hands buried deep in his pockets, looking down at his boots. "Go away," I called through the door, my hand on the deadbolt. The man didn't move. He didn't even look up. He just spoke, his voice a raspy, broken shadow of a sound I used to know better than my own name. "Sarah," he said, "I know I have no right. I know you probably want to kill me. But I'm dying, Sarah, and I can't leave until I tell you where it all went." My blood turned to ice. My fingers trembled as I gripped the handle. I shouldn't have opened it. I should have called the police, or grabbed a kitchen knife, or simply walked into the bathroom and drowned myself in the tub to escape the nightmare that was suddenly knocking on my reality. But curiosity is a poison, and I had been thirsty for answers for 7 years. I threw the bolt and swung the door open. The man looked up, and for a second, I didn't see the stranger. I saw the ghost. It was Elias. His eyes were sunken, rimmed with a sickly yellow hue, and his skin looked like parchment stretched too tight over bone. He didn't look like a man who had been living on a beach. He looked like a man who had been living in hell. He swayed on his feet, his breath coming in ragged hitches. He reached out a trembling hand toward me, but I stepped back, the bile rising in my throat. "Don't touch me," I hissed. "Why are you here, Elias? Why now?" He coughed, a wet rattling sound that shook his entire frame. He leaned against the doorframe for support, his gaze darting nervously toward the end of the hallway. "I didn't take it for me, Sarah," he whispered, his eyes filling with a sudden, sharp terror. "I took it to keep them away from you, but they found me, and now they followed me here." Before I could ask who they were, a black sedan with tinted windows screeched to a halt on the street below, and the heavy thud of multiple car doors slamming echoed up the stairwell. Elias looked at me, a tear tracking through the grime on his cheek. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I thought I had more time." At that moment, the lights in the hallway flickered and died, plunging us into total darkness. From the stairs, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots, sprinting upward. Not the boots of police officers, but the synchronized movement of something much more professional. And then, the first gunshot rang out. The sound of the gunshot was a physical blow, a sharp metallic crack that shattered the silence of the hallway and sent a spray of wood splinters flying from my doorframe. I didn't scream. There wasn't time. My body moved on a surge of pure, jagged adrenaline that I hadn't felt since the day the feds raided my office 7 years ago. I grabbed Elias by the collar of his heavy coat. He felt terrifyingly light, like a bundle of dry sticks, and hauled him inside. I slammed the door, throwing the deadbolt and the chain with hands that shook so violently I could hear the metal rattling. "Into the kitchen!" I hissed, shoving him toward the back of the studio. "Get down!" Another shot punched through the wood, higher this time, right at chest level. Then came the heavy, rhythmic thud of a shoulder hitting the door. My apartment was a third-floor walk-up with one exit and a rickety fire escape that looked like it hadn't been inspected since the Eisenhower administration. We were trapped. "Sarah," Elias wheezed, slumped against the linoleum floor, his face the color of wet ash. The vent, in the bathroom, the magnetic panel. "Shut up, Elias. Just shut up." I was frantic, scanning the room for anything I could use. A kitchen knife? A heavy lamp? I looked like a fool. I had spent years learning how to build skyscrapers, but I didn't know the first thing about surviving a hit squad. The door groaned. The frame was splintering. I looked at Elias, and for a split second, the rage finally broke through the shock. You brought this here? You ruined my life. You let me rot in the ruins for 7 years, and then you bring professional killers to my front door for your grand finale? They're not here for the money, he gasped, a dark line of blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. They're here for the ledger, the real one, the one that proves Sterling and Thorne wasn't just a firm. It was a laundromat for the Moretti family. I didn't steal the money, Sarah. I hid it. I hid it so they couldn't use it to buy the judges who were going to put you away. The door gave way with a sickening crash. I didn't think. I grabbed the heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove, the only weapon I had, and ducked behind the breakfast bar. 2 men in tactical vests and balaclavas stepped into the room, their movements synchronized and silent. They didn't look like mob enforcers. They looked like special ops. They didn't shout for us to put our hands up. They just raised their suppressed submachine guns. "The window!" I screamed at Elias. I threw the skillet with every ounce of terror-fueled strength I had. It didn't hit anyone, but it smashed into a lamp, plunging the corner of the room into shadow. In that heartbeat of distraction, I lunged for Elias, grabbing his arm and dragging him toward the bathroom window. He groaned in agony as I hoisted him onto the sill. We tumbled out onto the metal grating of the fire escape, just as a hail of silenced bullets shredded my mattress and the drywall, where we had been standing seconds before. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the iron stairs into a death trap. I forced Elias down the first flight, his breath coming in wet, ragged hitches. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. We reached the second-floor landing when I heard the window above us shatter. They were coming out after us. "Sarah, listen to me." Elias grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. "You have to go to the San Juans, the cottage, the old pier, the one we used to sit on to watch the ferries. We're going together, you coward," I spat, though I wasn't sure if I was saying it out of loyalty or the sheer need to make him live long enough to suffer for what he'd done. "No," he whispered. "They only need one of us to find the ledger. If I stay, I can buy you 3 minutes. That's all you need to get to the alley." "I'm not leaving you to be executed in a dumpster, Elias. You already lost everything once, Sarah. Don't lose your life, too." He shoved me toward the ladder that led to the ground. "Go! The magnetic panel in the vent. The key is there. It's not just money, it's the names. Everyone who betrayed you. Everyone who took a payout to watch you fall. You can take it all back." A shadow appeared on the landing above us. I saw the glint of a barrel. Elias didn't hesitate. He stood up, shielding me with his body, and lunged toward the stairs, his weak, trembling hands reaching for the intruder's legs. "Run!" he roared. I dropped down the ladder, my boots hitting the wet pavement of the alley with a bone-jarring thud. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran through the dark, my lungs burning, the sound of a struggle and a muffled cry echoing behind me. I dove behind a row of industrial trash bins just as the black sedan from earlier swung into the mouth of the alley, its headlights cutting through the rain like twin searchlights. I pressed my back against the cold, rusted metal of the bin, trying to stifle my sobbing breaths. I was back at 0. No, I was below 0. I was a fugitive with nothing but the clothes on my back and the memory of a dead man's instructions. The sedan slowed to a crawl. The window rolled down. I expected a gun. I expected the end. Instead, a voice called out, a voice that made my entire world tilt on its axis. It wasn't the voice of a killer. It was a woman's voice, calm, sophisticated, and hauntingly familiar. "Sarah? I know you're back there, honey. Don't be difficult. Elias was always a terrible liar, but you were always the smart one. You know there's nowhere else to go." I peeked through the gap between the bins. Standing under a street lamp, holding a black umbrella, was a woman I hadn't seen in 7 years. A woman who was supposed to be dead. It was my mother. She looked exactly as she had at her funeral, perfectly coiffed, elegantly dressed, and completely devoid of mercy. She stepped closer to my hiding spot, the light catching a small silver insignia on her lapel, the same logo that had been on the Horizon Project's secret offshore wire transfers. "Come out, Sarah," she said, her smile not reaching her cold gray eyes. "We've been waiting a long time to finish what your husband started. And believe me, he told us everything before he disappeared the first time." My phone, tucked into my pocket, suddenly vibrated. A text message from an unknown number flashed on the screen, visible in the dark. "Don't trust her. She's the one who paid him to leave." I looked from the phone to my mother, then back toward the fire escape where Elias was currently being interrogated, or worse. My mother took another step forward, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the man stepping out from the shadows behind her. It was the lead investigator who had handled my embezzlement case. He wasn't arresting her. He was handing her a silenced pistol. "One chance, Sarah," my mother said, raising the weapon. "Where is the ledger, or do I have to show you what we did to your father?" The funeral had been open casket. I remembered the smell of lilies so thick it felt like swallowing velvet. I remembered the waxy, frozen expression on my mother's face, the way the mortician had tried to recreate her haughty smile and failed. I had stood over that box and wept until my lungs burned, grieving the only person I thought had ever truly loved me. And now, 7 years later, that same woman was standing in a rain-slicked alley, holding a gun with the casual grace of someone holding a cocktail glass. "Mom?" The word felt like broken glass in my throat. "Don't be tedious, Sarah," Evelyn Sterling said, her voice cutting through the downpour. "The shock is beneath you. You were always the one with the analytical mind. Connect the dots. A heart attack at 54? A closed-loop cremation? It was the perfect exit strategy. I needed to be dead so the Morettis wouldn't look at the board of directors. I needed someone to take the fall, and Elias was supposed to be the fall guy, but he grew a conscience at the last possible second. "You framed me," I whispered. The rain was soaking through my thin sweater, but I was burning with a cold, white-hot fury. My own mother. "You let me lose everything. You let me go to the edge of a prison cell. I gave you a life, Sarah, and I can take it back." Her voice sharpened. Beside her, Miller, the lead investigator who had sat in my living room 7 years ago, drinking my coffee and promising to find Elias, stepped forward. He looked bored. This wasn't a tragedy to him. It was a Tuesday. "The ledger, Sarah," Miller said, his voice a low growl. "Elias said he left the coordinates with you. Where is it?" I looked at the phone in my hand. The screen was still glowing with that mysterious text. "Don't trust her. She's the one who paid him to leave. If my mother was here and Miller was here, then the men on the fire escape weren't the family. They were Miller's private security. And Elias. Elias was up there being tortured by the very people who had helped my mother fake her death." I looked at the trash bins, then at the mouth of the alley where a second car was pulling up. I was trapped. But my mother had forgotten one thing about the daughter she'd discarded. She had trained me to be an architect. I didn't just see walls. I saw load-bearing points. I saw the way things fell apart if you pulled the right lever. "I don't have the coordinates," I said, my voice steadying. "But I know where he hid the physical backup. He told me before we jumped." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She took a step closer, the suppressor on her pistol glinting. "Where?" "He didn't put it in the San Juans," I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. "He put it in the foundation of the Horizon Project, in the 4th level subgrade. He knew you'd never look there because you'd have to tear down the building to get it." The mention of the Horizon Project, her masterpiece, made her flinch. It was her vanity. It was her weakness. "He's lying," Miller snapped. "He wouldn't risk the structural integrity." "He didn't care about the building, Miller," I shouted over the wind. "He cared about me. He knew if you ever found it, you'd kill us both. He made it so the only way to get the evidence is to destroy the only thing you have left." In that moment of hesitation, as Miller and my mother locked eyes, I did the only thing I could. I didn't run away from them. I ran at them. I lunged for the heavy industrial dumpster, putting my shoulder into it and shoving with every bit of desperate strength I possessed. It was on a slight incline, and the rain-slicked pavement acted like a lubricant. The massive metal bin lurched forward, caught a wheel, and swung wildly toward Miller. He cursed and dove out of the way. My mother fired, the bullet whizzing past my ear and shattering the window of a parked car behind me. I didn't stop. I dived into the gap between the dumpster and the brick wall, scrambling toward the street. "Get her!" my mother screamed, her composure finally breaking into a jagged shriek. I burst out of the alley and into the street, nearly being leveled by a passing taxi. I didn't look back. I sprinted 3 blocks, weaving through the late-night foot traffic near the bus station, my lungs screaming. I ducked into a 24-hour laundromat, the heat and the smell of detergent, a jarring contrast to the freezing rain. I collapsed into a corner behind a row of industrial dryers, shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I checked the message again. "Don't trust her. She's the one who paid him to leave." I typed back, my thumbs fumbling. "Who is this?" The reply came instantly. "The only person who knows what really happened to your father. Get to the cottage. Now." The pier isn't just a landmark, Sarah. It's the key. I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the rain. My father had died in a car accident when I was 12, or so I had been told. If my mother had faked her death, what else had been a lie? I didn't have a car. I didn't have money. But I had the one thing they didn't think I had. The will of someone who had already been through hell and come out the other side. I spent the next 4 hours moving like a shadow. I used a prepaid card I'd kept for emergencies to hire a private car service. Not a rideshare that could be tracked, but an old-school town car company that took cash. By 4 a.m., I was on the ferry to the San Juans, huddled in the back of the car, watching the dark water of the Sound churn beneath us. The cottage was a wreck. 7 years of neglect had turned our sanctuary into a skeletal remains of wood and salt rot. The windows were boarded up, and the garden was a graveyard of weeds. I didn't go to the house. I went to the pier. The wood groaned under my weight as I walked to the end of the dock. The rain had turned to a fine, misty spray. I looked down at the dark water. The pier isn't just a landmark, it's the key. I remembered Elias sitting here, dangling his feet over the edge, fiddling with a loose plank. I knelt down, my fingers searching the underside of the heavy timber joists. Nothing. Just barnacles and cold slime. I moved to the very end where the ladder led down to the low tide mark. There, tucked behind a rusted iron bracket, my fingers brushed against something hard and plastic. A waterproof pelican case, no bigger than a deck of cards. I pulled it out, my breath hitching. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. "Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. Everything they told you was a lie. The Horizon Project wasn't a building. It was a tomb. Look at the blueprints for the elevator shaft. Look at the date. August 12th. August 12th. The day my father disappeared." I stood up, the drive clutched in my hand, ready to run back to the car. But as I turned, the headlights of 3 SUVs cut through the mist at the top of the driveway. They had tracked the car service, but it wasn't Miller or my mother who stepped out of the lead vehicle. It was Elias. He was standing tall, his back straight, his face healed and clean-shaven. He looked like the man I had married 10 years ago, vibrant, powerful, and utterly composed. He wasn't dying. He wasn't the broken ghost who had knocked on my door. He looked at me, a cold, predatory smile spreading across his face as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Thank you for finding it, Sarah," he called out, his voice echoing over the water. "I knew I could count on you to do the heavy lifting. Now give me the drive, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to see what's really buried under the horizon." I looked at the man I had loved, then at the dark, freezing water behind me. My phone buzzed in my pocket one last time. The man on the pier isn't Elias. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the frost-covered wood of the pier. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't take my eyes off the man standing 30 feet away. He looked perfect. His suit was tailored, a charcoal wool that absorbed the morning mist. His hair was styled in that effortless, wind-swept way Elias had always favored. Even the way he held his hands, left thumb hooked into his pocket, right hand resting casually at his side, was a carbon copy of the man I had lived with for a decade. But the text message was an icy blade in my gut. The man on the pier isn't Elias. I thought back to the man at my apartment. The sunken eyes, the yellowed skin, the smell of sickness and the genuine agonizing terror in his voice when he said he was sorry. That was Elias. That was the man who had been hollowed out by 7 years of running. The man in front of me was a trophy, a statue. "Sarah," the double said, his voice a flawless imitation, though it lacked the slight gravelly edge Elias got when he was nervous. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Put the drive down, let's go home. We can fix all of this. The firm, the reputation. It's all waiting for us." "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice caught in the salt-heavy wind. The man's smile didn't flicker. It was a masterpiece of biological engineering, or perhaps just a very expensive sociopath with a talent for mimicry. "Don't be dramatic, darling. It's cold out here. The SUVs have heaters, and there's a plane waiting at the private airstrip. We can be in Zurich by dinner." "You're not him," I said, louder this time, my hand tightening around the Pelican case. "Elias is dying. I saw him. I felt his hand on mine. You're just a suit with his face." The Elias on the pier sighed, a sound of practiced disappointment. He stepped forward, the wood of the pier groaning under his expensive Italian loafers. "Elias was a liability, Sarah. He was weak. He was a visionary who couldn't handle the weight of his own visions. Your mother realized that a long time ago. She needed a thorn who wouldn't crumble when the foundation got messy." "My mother," I spat. "Is she here? Is she watching her latest investment?" "She's waiting in the car," the man said. "She doesn't like the damp. Now, the drive. It's a very important piece of the puzzle, Sarah. It's the only thing that links the Horizon Project's structural anomalies to the, let's call them disposals of the late 90s. My mind raced back to the note in the case. Look at the blueprints for the elevator shaft. Look at the date, August 12th, the day my father disappeared. I looked at the SUVs. I looked at the man with my husband's face. I realized then that the Horizon Project wasn't just a financial scam. It was a monument built on top of a secret. My father hadn't died in a car accident. He had been integrated into the architecture of his own dream. And my mother hadn't just faked her death to escape the mob. She had faked it to protect the monster she had helped build. "What's in the shaft?" I asked, backing toward the edge of the pier. The water below was a churning black abyss. The double stopped walking. His expression shifted. The warmth, the Elias charm, vanished. It was replaced by a cold, vacant stillness that was far more terrifying. "A legacy, Sarah. Your father wanted to go to the police. He thought he could be a martyr. Instead, he became a structural support. And if you don't give me that drive, you're going to join him in the Phase 2 expansion." He lunged. I wasn't a fighter, but I was a woman who had lost everything once already. I didn't have anything left to fear. As he reached for me, I didn't move away. I dropped. I went for his knees, the same way I'd seen Elias do on the fire escape. The double wasn't expecting a frontal assault. He stumbled, his polished shoes sliding on the slick, mossy wood. I scrambled past him, heading for the ladder, but he caught my ankle. His grip was like a vice. He jerked me back, my chin slamming into the wood. Stars exploded in my vision. I felt him climbing over me, his weight pinning me down. "You were always the problem, Sarah," he hissed into my ear, and this time the voice was different, lower, cruel, devoid of any Elias-like inflection. "Elias loved you too much to kill you. That was his mistake. I don't have that problem." He reached for the Pelican case clutched in my hand. I rolled onto my back, kicking upward with every ounce of strength. My heel caught him in the throat. He gagged, recoiling, and I used the half-second of freedom to scramble to the very edge of the pier. The SUVs had moved closer. Men in black tactical gear were pouring out, flashlights cutting through the mist. "Sarah, stop!" It was my mother's voice. She was standing by the lead vehicle, her silhouette sharp against the headlights. "Don't be a fool. If you jump, you die. Give him the drive and we can forget all of this." I looked at the drive. I looked at the Elias monster as he regained his footing, his eyes filled with murderous intent. I looked at my mother, the woman who had buried my father in a column of wet concrete and called it a tragedy. I realized I couldn't win this fight. Not here, not like this, but I could change the game. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. I hit the send button on a pre-drafted email, the one I'd set up the moment I got into the town car. It was addressed to every major news outlet in Seattle, the FBI's regional office, and the head of the Department of Buildings. It contained the cloud link to the files I'd already started uploading from the drive using the car's Wi-Fi. "It's already gone, Mom!" I screamed. "The blueprints, the wire transfers, the logs from August 12th. It's all in the air." My mother froze. The men with the flashlights stopped. The double snarled, a guttural animal sound. He didn't care about the files. He cared about the task. He charged at me again, but this time he wasn't trying to grab the case. He was trying to push me over. I braced myself for the impact, for the fall into the freezing sound, but the impact never came. A thunderous crack echoed from the shoreline, not a gunshot, but the sound of high-powered glass shattering. The windshield of the lead SUV exploded, then another shot and the tires of the second vehicle blew out, the heavy frame sagging to the gravel. From the tree line, a flare hissed into the sky, bathing the entire pier in a violent, bloody red light. The double turned, confused, looking toward the woods. "Who the hell—" A figure emerged from the crimson smoke of the flare. He was limping, one arm hanging uselessly at his side, his face a mask of blood and soot. He was holding a long-range hunting rifle, the kind my father used to keep in the cottage's gun safe. It was the man from my apartment, the real Elias. He didn't look dying anymore. He looked like vengeance. "Get away from my wife," the real Elias rasped, his voice carrying over the wind like a death knell. He raised the rifle, but he wasn't aiming at the double. He was aiming at the base of the pier, specifically at the rusted fuel tank for the old generator that sat beneath the dock's entrance. "Sarah, dive!" he roared. I didn't hesitate. I rolled off the edge of the pier just as he pulled the trigger. The world turned into fire. The explosion was massive, a gout of orange flame that tore the wooden walkway into toothpicks and sent the double flying into the air like a broken doll. I hit the water, the cold punching the breath out of my lungs, the pressure dragging me down into the dark. I struggled toward the surface, my clothes heavy, my limbs numbing. When I finally broke the water, gasping for air, the pier was a burning wreck. The SUVs were trapped on the other side of the fire. I looked toward the shore, expecting to see Elias waiting for me. Instead, I saw him being hauled into the back of a black van that hadn't been there a moment ago, a van with no plates. And standing over him, holding a syringe to his neck, was someone I recognized. It was the person who had been texting me. As the van sped away into the woods, my phone, waterproof and still clutched in my hand, vibrated one last time. "The files you uploaded were a decoy, Sarah. Thank you for the real ones. Now let's see how much you're willing to pay to get him back." The water was a tomb of ice. For a few seconds I drifted in the weightless dark, the sound of the explosion muffled into a dull, rhythmic thrumming in my ears. My lungs screamed for air, but my mind was stuck on that last text. Decoy. I had uploaded a decoy. The real Elias, the broken, dying man who had truly loved me, was gone again, taken by a new player in a game I still didn't fully understand. I broke the surface, gasping, the freezing air hitting my throat like a serrated blade. The pier was a skeleton of fire, casting long, dancing shadows across the churning water. I swam toward the shore, my movements slow and heavy, until my boots finally found the mud. I crawled onto the rocky beach, shivering so violently my teeth felt like they were going to shatter. I looked at the Pelican case. It was still gripped in my hand. If the files I'd uploaded were a decoy, then what was on this drive? I opened the case, shielding it from the rain, and looked at the USB stick. It wasn't a standard drive. It was an encrypted hardware key, the kind used to authorize massive, irreversible financial transfers or to unlock high-security servers. "You're stronger than your father was," a voice said from the shadows of the tree line. I scrambled back, my heart nearly stopping. A man stepped into the light of the burning pier. He wasn't the double, and he wasn't Elias. He was older, wearing a tattered tactical jacket, his face crisscrossed with the kind of scars that only come from a life spent in the dirt. "Marcus," I whispered. He had been my father's head of security, the man who had disappeared a week after my father's accident. "The real Elias found me 3 years ago in a hole in Cambodia," Marcus said, his voice like grinding gravel. "He'd been kept as a contingency by your mother, a way to keep the Morettis in line. If they ever turned on her, she'd release him to the feds and pin everything on him. But he escaped. He spent 3 years clawing his way back to you, Sarah." "Where is he, that van?" "My team," Marcus said, gesturing toward the woods. "He's safe. He's on a ventilator. He took a bullet during the explosion on the pier, but he's alive. He told me to tell you that the absolution isn't for him. It's for you." "I don't want absolution," I said, standing up on shaky legs, the fire behind me reflecting in my eyes. "I want the truth, and I want the Horizon Project to fall." Marcus nodded slowly. He handed me a satellite phone. "Then let's finish it. Your mother and Miller are heading back to the city. They think they've won. They think the fire took care of the evidence." The drive wasn't just a ledger. As Marcus explained during the harrowing 2-hour drive back to Seattle, it was a dead man's switch for the Horizon Project's entire digital infrastructure. My father hadn't just been an architect, he'd been an engineer of safety. He had installed a series of sensors within the foundation's structural supports, sensors designed to alert the city if the concrete ever settled or if the integrity was compromised. My mother had bypassed them years ago, but the drive in my hand was the only thing that could reactivate the system and broadcast the data directly to the Department of Buildings. We reached the Horizon Project at 4 a.m. The towering glass and steel monolith stood over the Seattle waterfront like a tombstone. It was nearly finished, a monument to a decade of lies. I didn't sneak in. I walked right through the front gates, using my old master security override that, in her arrogance, my mother had never bothered to change. Marcus and his men moved through the shadows, neutralizing the private security guards with silent, professional efficiency. I took the elevator to the 4th-level subgrade. The air here was thick with the smell of damp concrete and ancient dust. I found the central maintenance hub hidden behind a false panel in the elevator machine room. As I jammed the drive into the port, the lights in the room flickered and died. A backup generator kicked in, bathing the concrete walls in a sickly red emergency glow. "I knew you'd come here," my mother's voice echoed through the chamber. Evelyn Sterling stepped out from behind a massive concrete pillar. She was alone this time, her silk coat stained with rain, a small, elegant pistol in her hand. Behind her, the double, the man with Elias's face, stood like a silent golem. "It's over, Mom," I said, my hand hovering over the execute key on the terminal. "The sensors are live. In 30 seconds, every structural engineer in the state is going to see exactly what's buried in column 4B. They're going to see the hollow space where you put Dad." Evelyn's face contorted, her mask of grace finally shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. "I did it for us, Sarah. He was going to throw it all away. He was going to give the Morettis the firm. I saved our legacy." "You didn't save a legacy," I shouted, the tears finally coming. "You built a cage. You put Elias in it. You put me in it. And you murdered the only man who ever truly loved you." "Kill her," Evelyn whispered to the double. The man who looked like my husband stepped forward, his eyes blank and cold. But before he could reach me, the terminal chirped. A progress bar hit 100%. A low, deep groan rumbled through the floor, the sound of the building's automated safety systems engaging. High-intensity floodlights snapped on throughout the subgrade, illuminating a section of the wall that had been marked with a red X on the digital display. The double stopped. He looked at the wall, then at me. "Who am I?" he asked, his voice suddenly small, the mimicry failing. "You're nothing," I said. "You're a ghost of a man you'll never be." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, dozens of them. Marcus had done his job. The city was coming. Miller burst into the room, his face pale. "Evelyn, we have to go. The feds are at the gate. The data, it's everywhere. They're calling for an immediate evacuation of the building." My mother looked at the wall where my father lay. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying, hollow vacuum. She raised the gun, aiming it directly at my heart. "If I lose everything," she hissed, "then so do you." Crack. The sound echoed through the concrete chamber. I braced for the impact, but it never came. Instead, Evelyn gasped, her gun clattering to the floor. She looked down at her chest, where a single red dot had appeared. I looked up. In the doorway, supported by Marcus, stood the real Elias. He was pale, hooked up to a portable oxygen tank, his hand trembling as he lowered the rifle Marcus had given him. "Absolution," Elias whispered, his voice a ghost of the man I loved. The police swarmed the room seconds later. Miller was tackled to the ground. The double went down without a fight, seemingly relieved to finally be caught. My mother was led away in handcuffs, screaming about her building, her legacy, her daughter's betrayal. She didn't look like a queen anymore. She looked like a madwoman. The Horizon Project was condemned the next day. The recovery of my father's remains took a week, but when it was done, the entire Sterling and Thorne empire collapsed under the weight of its own rot. 2 months later, I sat on the porch of a small cabin in the mountains, far from the rain of Seattle. The sun was warm on my face. Inside, I could hear the rhythmic hiss of a medical-grade oxygen concentrator. Elias walked out onto the porch. He was thinner than he'd ever been, and he walked with a cane, but his eyes were clear. The yellow hue was gone. He sat down beside me and took my hand. "I lost everything, Elias," I said softly. "The firm, the house, the name. I'm a Sterling without a legacy." Elias squeezed my hand, his grip solid and real. "You didn't lose everything, Sarah. You just cleared the site." He looked out at the horizon, where the sun was setting behind the peaks. "Now," he said, "we can finally start the build." I leaned my head on his shoulder, the weight of the last 7 years finally lifting. The cloak of grief was gone. For the first time in my life, the foundation was solid.